Thanks for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, Nairobi police fire tear gas to disperse protesters and detain dozens at a demonstration against alleged abductions of government critics by security forces. Also, election officials in Chad put low turnout over the weekend's election down to cold weather. The polls meant to hasten in a return to civilian rule are hailed by the leading party, but opposition boycotters say that they were fixed. And 2025 is just around the corner, and from political shake-ups and breakdowns to Africa's big wins around the world, before we can say out with the old, Eye on Africa takes a look back at some of the stops of the continent's 2024 journey. But first, dozens of demonstrators were arrested by Kenyan police on Monday during protests against an alleged human rights abuses by security forces. Now, they've been accused of abducting critics of President William Ruto's administration in the wake of anti-government rallies that began back in June. Our Emerald Maxwell tells us more.
Police surround protesters, staging a peaceful sit-in in the Kenyan capital. After first failing to dislodge them with tear gas, the police moved in on horseback and bundled some of them into the back of a police truck. The demonstrators had come out to protest a wave of mysterious abductions of government critics, which they blame on the authorities.
I'm here so that my child can be released. This is my child. I ask the government to please say where he is.
The disappearances have primarily involved young people who have criticised President William Ruto online and followed anti-government protests that started in June. On Friday, President Ruto promised an end to abductions, albeit without admitting government culpability. Police has denied involvement, but activists have questioned why they appear to not be investigating the disappearances.
We have a constitution, we have the rule of law. This lifestyle of being abducted should have ended in the 90s.
The current spate of alleged abductions appear to follow the example of former President Daniel Moi, who became synonymous with state-sanctioned disappearances. Kenyan newspaper Daily Nation reported that around a dozen protesters were detained on Monday, including opposition lawmaker Akia Mtata, who joined the sit-in.
By the government, which is targeting its critics. So this regime has become rogue, and we are here to demand to call the regime back to order.
Earlier in the day, he filed a case at the High Court in an attempt to compel the state to release the missing young people.
Now, at least 71 people are believed to have lost their lives in a road accident in southern Ethiopia. On the approach to a tight bend ahead of a bridge, the driver of a truck carrying a wedding party lost control of the vehicle and careered off into a river in Sidama State. At least 4 people survived Sunday's incident and are reportedly still suffering from shock. And election officials in Chad have put the low turnout to the weekend's general election down to cold weather. Now, the polls were meant to hasten in a return to civilian rule. But critics of President Mohamed Idris Deby say that the exercise has not been transparent. Deby won this year's presidential election after taking over from his late father in 2021. Our Harold Girard brings us more from Jamina.
Turnout was low for Sunday's parliamentary and local elections, with the Chad's National Electoral Management Agency putting it at just 52%. We were underground and the lines appeared to be really thin at the polling stations we visited here in Jamena. These elections are meant to end a 3 years transitional rule. Many of those who did cast their votes want their new representative to focus on security issues and the economy.
As a young citizen, I came to vote to fulfill my duty by choosing my lawmaker, my mayor, and city councillor. I want them to hear this message. If we elect you, it's so you can come meet us, the youth, listen to us, and take our concerns into account.
Ceux qui vont être au niveau des législatifs, The legislative elections should give us lawmakers committed to advancing the country's development. As for those elected at the provincial level, I think they should handle decentralization. Provinces should become places where Chadians live in harmony.
There is a little suspense about the outcome of these elections. Over 10 opposition parties boycott the polls. They are saying this is just a way to consolidate power for the actual president, Mahamat Idriss Déby.
Le peuple tchadien n'a pas voulu cautionner qu'un président.
Chadians didn't want to allow a president who corrupted the referendum and stole the presidential election to name people that they can't trust as lawmakers, not even as mayors or provincial leaders. The president made the democratic process useless when he weakened the state institutions. He destroyed all good governance principles.
Il a détruit tous les principes de bonne gouvernance.
He's backed by the MPS, the Salvation Patriotic Movement, which rules the country for over 30 years and whose candidates are widely expected to win. The results are expected in about 2 weeks.
Harold there for us in Chad. Now, private security is booming business in South Africa. Police are understaffed and have a tense, low-trust relationship with many of those that they're meant to look after. So many are taking their safety into their own hands, or at least the hands of those they can pay for protection. Take a look.
South Africa has the biggest private security industry in the world, with 3 times more staff than the police force. The sector is negotiating a partnership with the police to deal with rampant crime like here in the Cape Flats. Tuwane takes us to a high-risk township in Philippi East. Here, even the police are at risk of being robbed or killed for their weapons.
You need to be brave. You need to be... The kind of criminals we have in South Africa need you. They force you to be brave. They force you because they have no respect for life. They will do anything to kill you. So you have to be brave. You have to put in a good fight.
As a show of force, Tuwane makes a stop at a client's business that has repeatedly been extorted by gangs.
This is where we respond should they get problems from the office or from wherever we were. This is where we come to. Very much risky, very much risky. You can lose your life here.
There are 16,000 private security companies in South Africa. But 20 kilometres away in Bo-Kaap, members of the Neighbourhood Watch say they have had negative experiences with some security companies using excessive force. The vigilante group walks around the neighbourhood and communicates with kids on the street. Ibrahim checks a local isn't up to no good.
They must have respect to the residents as well. It mustn't be like there's private security company and they want to show who they are. You will never make a change like that because people will hate you for that. Because we have a very... The residents within Bo-Kaap, the community is very laid-back people. They're very friendly. So if you're going to act in that manner to them, they will react to you.
While violent crime has risen over the last decade, the police force has dropped by about 10%.
Now, from the deepening of the war in Sudan, which has triggered the world's largest humanitarian crisis, to big political upsets in several southern African countries, to happier achievements like the growing international appreciation for African intellectual expertise at events like the Earthshot Prize. It's been a big year for the continent. Well, now we'll be reflecting back on some more of Africa's landmark moments over the last 12 months. Take a look.
With no fewer than 11 presidential elections, 2024 was a year of sweeping political change for the African continent. In total, 5 countries saw a new party rise to power, including Senegal, where 44-year-old Bassirou Diomaye Faye became the continent's youngest head of state after a tense presidential campaign. Together with his Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko, Faye announced a series of measures intended to shake up Senegalese politics. And following his party's resounding victory in the November legislative elections, he now has the tools to see his reforms through. Meanwhile, in Mozambique, ruling party candidate Daniel Chapo was elected president in a highly controversial vote, which observers said was riddled with irregularities. The result was rejected by the opposition, triggering a series of street protests and a violent security crackdown, which resulted in the deaths of over 250 people. Elsewhere, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso continued on their path of political transformation following recent military coups. The three countries pressed on with plans to quit regional bloc ECOWAS, saying their decision was irreversible, and announced the creation of their own joint military force to combat terrorist groups in the Sahel region. 2024 also saw the intensification of climate-related disasters in Africa. Massive floods caused by extensive rainfall impacted some 11 million people across the continent, destroying crops and infrastructure and displacing entire communities. Countries like Chad, Cameroon, Niger, and Nigeria were particularly affected and experienced record levels of flooding, which continued into November. Amid the doom and gloom, 2024 also had a few bright spots, especially for Ivorian football fans. Playing on home soil, the Elephants defied the odds to win the third African Cup of Nations in the country's history. After losing 2 of its first 3 games, the team found itself on the brink of elimination and saw its coach fired mid-tournament. But the players managed to string together crucial wins against Senegal, Mali, and DR Congo, defeating Nigeria in the final to lift the trophy in front of a delirious home crowd. 2024 was also the year the Grammy Awards introduced a new category, Best African Music Performance. It was won by 22-year-old South African singer Tyla over Nigerian Afrobeats icon Burna Boy.
Well, we'll be leaving you with some images of the end-of-year tradition from Niger, in which top athletes from the country's traditional wrestling scene clash. The national saber competition happens in capital cities around the country every year around this time. And 2024 offered up the 45th edition. And this time around, it was Abba Ibrahim from Niamey who was crowned champion, beating 6-time champion Isiaka after a grueling fight in the Dosso Arena.
The history of our world is ever-changing. The flow of information is constantly increasing. We cover all subjects. We verify. We commit. On the ground, in all circumstances, to anticipate the future by understanding the present. We are with you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. France 24, understanding the news. Liberté, égalité, actualité.